Today I want to answer the question, what is a traditional foods kitchen? And you might be surprised by my answer. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. I get a lot of emails and comments from all of you, my sweet friends, who ask me, what exactly do I mean when I use the term traditional foods kitchen? And specifically, what do I mean when I talk about transitioning from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen? Before we even get started talking about what is a processed foods kitchen, what is a traditional foods kitchen, and moving from one to the other, the first thing that I want to say, and this is what I alluded to in the intro, that you may be surprised about, but what I want to say is that I never expect you to be perfect when it comes to trying to create a traditional foods kitchen. And it's not something that I ever expect you to be able to do right away. You do not have to make this transition overnight, not even within a few weeks, not even within a few months. Often the process of creating a traditional foods kitchen that you feel is running smoothly and that you feel comfortable with what you're making can often take a year or more, especially if you're not only learning to make things homemade, but you're also learning how to cook. So that's the most important thing that you need to know. Never allow yourself to be overwhelmed. Don't try to rush. Don't try to be perfect. Take your time implementing these traditional foods little by little. If you take this approach where you go slowly and you go easy on yourself, you're going to find that you're not going to get overwhelmed and that you're going to be successful. And the reason for taking your time actually is twofold. One is to not feel overwhelmed, but the second is the fact that traditional foods are often, as I have shared with you in the past, if you've been with me for a while, you've heard me say this before, traditional foods can sometimes be persnickety. Your sourdough starter is not going to be perfect day one. Your sourdough bread's not going to be perfect day one. Your bone broth may take a little tweaking until you get the flavor that you like. And then there's ferments. Oh my goodness, I think it's probably ferments that I get the most questions about. Your ferments take time. They take time not only to ferment, but they take time for you to learn about the conditions in your kitchen and in your home and what is the best place for you to ferment, what is the right temperature, how many days is it going to take you to reach the fermentation process that you like, and so on and so forth. So this really is a process, and even more than a process, this is a journey. And I am so happy that you're here with me on this journey, because even though I was raised making these type of foods and I've been making them for my own family for over 20 years now, I'm still on this journey and I learn new things every day. But the most important thing is that I never allow myself to get overwhelmed. I never try to tell myself that I need to be perfect. And so that's why I want the same to be here in our community, here for you. So the most important thing to remember is that no matter where you are on your journey creating a traditional foods kitchen, you're always welcome here. I never expect perfection, and I always look forward to your questions. And many of you will often say, oh, I know this is a stupid question or a simple question. There's no stupid questions when it comes to traditional foods. Learning how to cook, learning how to make traditional foods homemade can sometimes be challenging. And that's why I want to be here for you, as well as many other people in our community who have experience as well. We all want to be here for each other to help each other on this journey. So ask your questions. Never worry about how simple you may think that they sound. Nothing is unwelcome here. Every question is welcome. And I'm just so glad that we're on this journey together, creating our traditional foods kitchens. So let's talk about a processed foods kitchen and a traditional foods kitchen. First of all, what is a processed foods kitchen? What do I mean when I use that terminology? Basically, a processed foods kitchen is when we buy those foods that are already prepared for us. And as I've shared with you in the past, my mother always referred to what we call processed foods today as prepared foods. So basically, if you're still in a processed foods kitchen phase, you're buying salad dressing already made for you. You're buying mayonnaise already made for you. You're buying crackers already made for you. You're buying cereal already made for you. You may be buying bone broth in jars. You may be buying sauerkraut in jars, and so on and so forth. You're basically buying foods that have already been prepared for you, but these are all foods that you can easily make homemade. Not only in making them homemade, not only are they going to be better for you with better ingredients, they're going to be less expensive. Because you will notice, if you look at the ingredients, for example, on a bottle of store-bought salad dressing, it's going to have a lot of ingredients listed. And many times it's going to have ingredients that you can't even pronounce. And if you don't recognize these as ingredients that maybe your mom, your grandmother, or maybe your great-grandmother, depending on how old you are, but if these are ingredients that you can't even recognize as something that maybe your mom or grandmother or great-grandmother used in their kitchen, then chances are you don't want it in your traditional foods kitchen. Now, even if you say to me, "Oh, Mary, but I buy this really fine, organic salad dressing, and all the ingredients have is olive oil and vinegar and some herbs and spices. So it's basically a very natural, traditional food salad dressing." Well, that's great that more prepared foods are becoming more natural and more wholesome in the ingredients that are used in them. However, chances are they're pretty expensive. And if you learn to make your own Italian salad dressing with your own olive oil that you've purchased, your own vinegar, maybe that you've even made homemade, which I've showed you how to do, and you use a little spice mixture or herb mixture that I've also showed you how to make, an Italian herb mixture, to make your own Italian salad dressing, it's going to be a lot less expensive. Plus, it's going to be a lot fresher than something you could buy at the store. And there's something important that I want to share with you about learning to make as much as you can homemade as opposed to buying it prepared. And this is something to do with something that my mother would say to me when I would go to the market with her. And she started saying this to me even, as a young child shopping with her. And that was, we would go through the aisle and she would see all these, what she called prepared foods. And she would tell me, these are very easy to make homemade. We don't need to buy these prepared. And even back then, I'm a product of the 50s and 1960s. And so even back then, a lot of the prepared foods, a lot of the processed foods or packaged foods were relatively natural, you could say, in their ingredients. The lists of ingredients on the back of, say, a bottle of prepared salad dressing back then wasn't necessarily as long as it is today, because I think there are more chemicals and whatnot that have been invented to use in these things. But even so, my mother would never buy these things. And she would say to me, you can make this homemade, and you can make this homemade, or we can make this homemade when we get home, and we can make this homemade for a lot less money. And she would say to me, when you spend less money at the grocery store, you then have more money to save and to take care of your family. She was training me up, to be a good homemaker in the future. And she would say, you have more money to help your family with. But then she always followed it up with one more sentence that always stayed with me all my life. And then she would follow it up and say, not only will you have more money to take care of your family, you will have more money to help the poor. And that always rang true with me, because we may look around the world, we may look around our own country, depending what country you live in, or around the world, and we see all the various problems there are. But it's not possible for just one person to solve all of the world's problems. But what we can do is solve little problems at the local level. And so my mother's words always rang true. And if we have a little extra money from our food budget that we can save to help our families, but then maybe to also buy some things that we can then share with the various food banks in our area or with our local churches, whatever the case may be, that can be very personally rewarding, that you feel you're at least doing something, you're doing your part, a little bit that you can to at least help people in your community. And often, even the little bit that you do can make a very big difference to someone else. So making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen has a lot of ripple effects, because not only are you going to save money, you can maybe help other people in your community, and you can feed your family in a more wholesome way. I show you a very simple recipe for how to make a sandwich bread. And this is where I want to talk about that I'm not a stickler. I'm not going to tell you that tomorrow you got to be making sourdough. Learning how to just make bread is a process. And once you get that under your belt, then you can start to learn how to make sourdough bread. And so I have a video where I show you how to make a very simple sandwich bread. And I'm hoping that this can start to be a substitution for you to be able to make at home, as opposed to buying that sleeve of bread, in a plastic wrapper from the grocery store. Because if you ever look on the back of that, there's often a lot of ingredients in that bread, and ingredients that maybe you don't want in your traditional foods kitchen. But I show you how to make a very easy bread with some flour, and I just use plain all-purpose flour or bread flour that's very easy to find at your grocery store, some water, some salt, and some yeast. And you can learn how to make a very simple sandwich bread, and that makes me so happy when I get comments and emails from you and you share with me that you'd never made bread before, but you made that sandwich bread and you couldn't believe how easy it was, and now it's your favorite bread. That brings me a lot of joy. So you're going to save money, help people in your community, and feed your family much better than if you were buying these different processed or prepared foods at the grocery store. So that's basically what a processed foods kitchen is, where everything is already prepared for you. And now we're going to talk about making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, and what I mean by traditional foods kitchen. So a traditional foods kitchen, as the name implies, is meaning that you're going to have traditional foods. So what are these traditional foods? Basically, they're foods that you're going to make homemade. And this is where I just want to take a second to say that, and I briefly touched on this talking about making the sandwich bread. A traditional foods kitchen means a lot of different things to every individual person, because someone who has a traditional foods kitchen may be very happy just always making that sandwich bread, and you may never transition to making sourdough. And that's okay, because I'm not a stickler. I am not like a fanatic when it comes to traditional foods. If you eventually want to start making sourdough bread, I think that's wonderful. And is it better than a traditional sandwich bread that's made with yeast? I think so, in my humble opinion. But if it's something that you simply don't want to do, don't have the time to do, maybe you've tried and you've become discouraged, although I help you with that, so that you can maybe eventually transition to making sourdough bread, the most important thing that I want you to understand is that here in our community, traditional foods kitchen basically means just trying to start to make as many things homemade as you can. And again, this is not going to be done overnight. But basically, when you want to start making the transition to a traditional foods kitchen, you can start making your own sandwich bread. You can start roasting a chicken. That's usually where I tell you to start. That's actually, I think, my very first video that I ever put up here on YouTube was showing you how to shop for a chicken and then how to roast a chicken. And again, I'm not going to be a fanatic and a stickler. I want you to stay in your budget. If you can afford a pasture-raised chicken, that's great. And then I say eke out every little bit of that chicken as possible. But if that's not in your budget yet, that's okay. Just buy any chicken, roast that chicken, and I show you how, and it's a very detailed video. If you're new to roasting a whole chicken, I walk you through step by step. Buy that chicken, roast that chicken, sit down, give thanks for the food in front of you, and enjoy that meal. That is going to be better than anything that you can buy already prepared for you, or any fast food that you might get on your way home. And it has so much more to do with just roasting that chicken. It has to do with the fact that you also bought a chicken that was in your budget. Because nothing is worse than going out of your budget and just causing you to have stress, because stress is never good for us. That's the worst thing we can do. I don't think it really matters what we're eating if we're under a lot of stress. But what's great about being on this journey and transitioning from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen is that as you start to make more things homemade, you will have more money in your grocery budget to start buying better products, better whole foods, the foods, not necessarily the store, better whole foods, whole ingredients to start with that you're going to make your traditional meals with. In the beginning, you might just buy the $5 whole chicken that is commercially raised. You might just buy a carton of eggs that have been commercially raised. But over time, as you start to learn to make more things homemade, and you're able to move money from what those processed foods cost to what it costs to make things homemade, you then might be able to buy a pastured chicken. You might then be able to buy eggs from that came from a chicken that was pastured. So little by little, you can increase the quality of the ingredients that you're buying. And also something you have to keep in mind with is that when you start to transition to a traditional foods kitchen and you start to make more things homemade, you're generally just cooking more and you're eating at home more. And when you eat at home more, you always save money. So when you are able to start moving money from that part of your budget that you used for eating out, you now can move that to buying better ingredients for cooking all the wonderful homemade meals that you're making. And when I start talking about making homemade meals, again, I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I have a lot of videos with very simple recipes. I really am all about keeping it very simple. I don't have like a ton of ingredients, and I talk a lot about substitutions. Even many of you have made me laugh when I get emails and comments and you say, Mare, why do you even call it a recipe? You're making so many substitutions. But that's the whole point, because I want you first of all to use what you have on hand and not have to rush out to buy some bottle of spice that you're never going to use again. I want you to learn how to cook with what you have. So that's why I'll often say, oh, you don't have this, then substitute that. You don't have this, then substitute that. Because that's the whole point of, in essence, sort of learning I think there's a book called How to Cook Without Recipes or something like that. The book has recipes, which is cute, but the whole point is just learning how to be flexible and learning how to cook with what you have. And also to keep your recipes very simple. Like for today, I'm making something that's called praised chicken. And it's a combination of braising a chicken and poaching a chicken, hence the name praised chicken. And it's something that I got out of a Nigella Lawson cookbook, who I enjoy her cookbooks very much. But it's a one-pot meal. And you basically braise the chicken, you brown it a little on top, and then you flip it over. I have a video where I show you me making this, and it's you brown it a little, you flip it over, you add your veggies, you add some water, nothing fancy, and then you let it simmer for about an hour and a half, and you have the most tender fallen off the bone chicken with some veggies and some broth. It's magnificent. And your part in that is a few minutes. And your stovetop is, or you can do it in the oven too. Either way is doing all the work. So the type of meals that I'm talking about are not time consuming. That's another thing that in addition, first of all, let's talk about cost and time, because I do get a lot of comments and emails where you will say to me, oh my gosh, Mary, eating traditional foods is very expensive. And I understand that. If you go to the grocery store and you see, or the farmer's market or wherever the case may be, and you see that a pastured chicken today, depending on where you live, may be $25, you know, I can see how people would say, oh my goodness, that's very expensive. I can't afford that. And that's why I say, stay in your budget. You don't have to buy that pastured chicken. And then maybe over time, as you get to know people in your area more, you get to know local farmers, and you might even be eventually at some point raising your own chickens. You know, I have seen this transition in many people that I know. They start with a complete processed foods kitchen, and next thing you know, they're raising chickens and selling eggs and butchering their own chickens and all. It's quite fantastic. But so I understand that it can appear expensive in the beginning. And I completely understand you having sticker shock. I do too, you know, so that's why I'm never going to tell you to rush out and buy that pastured chicken. But if at some point your budget allows for you to buy a pastured chicken, depending on what the cost of it is in your area, I also show you how to eke out every little last bit of that chicken to not only enjoy the roast chicken and then get every little bit of meat left over from that chicken to create another dish, then to use the carcass and any little skin scraps or whatever you have to make a bone broth. So you're going to eke out every little cent of that, whatever that chicken cost. But the other thing that I mentioned, not only cost, also I hear time. Mary, this is going to take me forever to make all this stuff homemade, and I don't have that kind of time. And I understand that completely too. That's why the recipes that I share with you are all ones where you can make these things very quickly. For example, I show you how to make bone broth not only in the slow cooker, but also in the Instant Pot. Now I have a recipe where I show you how to make it on the stovetop, but if you're not interested in babysitting that and you don't have the time, I show you how to put your slow cooker or your Instant Pot to work. The same with the sandwich bread that I mentioned earlier. It's very easy to make and very fast. Also, when it comes to homemade cereals and like homemade granolas and homemade flake cereals, I show you easy ways to do this so that there's not a lot of work on your part, and basically it's just a matter of your oven or your slow cooker or your Instant Pot or your stovetop doing the bulk of the work. Even when it comes to making homemade crackers, I don't have the patience to be doing all the rolling out and the scoring. I show you how to make easy slice and bake crackers. It's almost like just buying the dough at the grocery store. Remember the slice and bake cookies? I show you how to do slice and bake crackers, and you can have them ready in no time. And how to make homemade mayonnaise? I show you how to do it in a minute. So please know that when I talk about a traditional foods kitchen, I'm talking how to stay on budget and how to save time. So for you, a traditional foods kitchen may just start out as roasting a chicken and making some homemade sandwich bread. But then over time, as you're on this journey, you may eventually get to a point where you're making homemade bone broth. I hope you'll do that with the roast chicken. It literally costs you pennies. And then you're going to learn how to make ferments. You're going to make homemade sauerkraut, as well as a host of other homemade ferments, including fermented condiments like mustard and ketchup. You can make them homemade and you can ferment them. Why do we want to ferment them? Because when we ferment them, they become rich in good bacteria. And what is good bacteria? It's basically something that's very good for our guts. And scientists tell us if we have a healthy gut, we are healthier overall. That good bacteria is probiotics. And you hear so much about probiotics, but you don't have to buy them, because a teaspoon or a tablespoon of the brine from your fermented cabbage, which you've made into sauerkraut, is going to be much richer than an entire bottle of store-bought probiotics. And then you're going to start culturing your own dairy. I show you how to make yogurt, and I show you how to make it in a very easy way. All you need is a bowl. You don't need a special machine. And if you don't, I know a lot of you have told me you make it in the Instant Pot, but I know many of you don't have an Instant Pot. So if you don't have an Instant Pot, if you don't have a slow cooker, if you don't have a yogurt maker, none of this matters. I show you how to make it in a bowl. And then maybe eventually you'll be starting to try your hand at how to make a sourdough starter. And I have a number of videos where I show you how to make different sourdough starters, how to make one with rye flour, if you can find rye flour. But I also show you how to make one with all-purpose flour, because that's very easy to find at most grocery stores. And I also troubleshoot in that video where I show you how to make a sourdough starter with all-purpose flour. I go over all the problems that may arise, and then I offer solutions, because I know from many of you it's ferments and sourdough starters that I've heard can often be the most persnickety and the most challenging to have success with. And then hopefully over time you get your sourdough starter going, and then you can start making sourdough bread. And that's going to be very rewarding. And I show you different ways to make sourdough bread. I have some that I refer to as kind of your quick and easy sourdough breads. Technically, are they true sourdoughs that you've allowed to rise overnight or even longer? No. But the reason that I have a sort of quick and easy sourdough bread recipe is for people who are new to making sourdough. It has a relatively short rise, which makes it easy on you. Plus, it has a much less sour flavor. And as you're making the transition to incorporating sourdough bread into your traditional foods kitchen, sometimes if you go all in and make a real sourdough bread, you may not initially like it, or your family may not initially like it. They may find that it's very sour in flavor. So making this more quick and easy version of sourdough bread may be a slow introduction to trying sourdough bread. And so it has a much more mild flavor, and as I said, it's got a much shorter rise time, so it just makes the whole process a lot easier for you. And know that I haven't forgotten about those of you who have told me that you just have had it with sourdough starter, and that you're really just not interested in making sourdough bread on a regular basis. You're not interested in trying to keep your sourdough starter going, and so on and so forth. And I understand that completely. And because of that, I share with you something that actually is not my original idea, but actually an idea of my girlfriend's, who she was a very busy mother, and she has a lot of children. Or she is a very busy mother, and she has a lot of children. And the little secret that she shared with me, I refer to as the busy mother's sourdough shortcut. I think that's what I call it. And I basically show you how to get a sourdough starter going that really involves starting with a little tiny pinch of yeast. But as my girlfriend says, over time, she would just keep this in her refrigerator, and whenever she wanted to make bread, it'd actually have the dough and everything in the container. I'll be sure to link to the video so that you can watch that video if it's something you're interested in. And she'd pull it out and be ready to make bread, and she would never add more yeast or anything to it. She'd just keep feeding the same container. And she'd say, oh, over time, it's got to be close enough to sourdough. But those of you who have watched that video, who were kind of at your wit's end with sourdough starter and have started using that, have told me how happy that you were to have that little secret to kind of kick things off. And now you consider yourself an accomplished sourdough baker, even though you started with the Busy Mother's sourdough shortcut. So as you see, this is a journey, and little by little, you start incorporating these things into your traditional foods kitchen. And by not rushing, and by not overstressing yourself, by not overwhelming yourself, little by little, you find what works in your kitchen, what works for you, what you like, what your friends like, what your family likes. And so you pick and choose, and you make your own unique traditional foods kitchen, making homemade what you want to make homemade. You might find that you're extremely enthusiastic about creating this traditional foods kitchen of yours. And you might find that you're sprouting your own grain and drying it and making your own homemade sprouted flour and your own homemade sprouted bread. I show you how to do these things. And again, they're not time consuming. They are easy for your part, and more work for the grain that has to go through the sprouting process. But your involvement is really just a few minutes. You may find that you start sprouting beans to make them more digestible to eat. You may find that you start soaking your nuts overnight and draining them and making them more digestible that you can then use in your cereals and so on and so forth. You may find that you start to soak and sprout your seeds. Again, why? To make them more digestible, to allow our bodies to better assimilate the nutrients that are in these things. That's why we sprout grain, or why we soak and sprout beans, or why we soak and sprout seeds, or why we soak nuts. All of this is to make these foods more digestible and allow us to absorb the nutrients better. But that's okay if you're not doing that on day one, and it's okay if you never want to do that. The whole point of a traditional foods kitchen is making homemade what you want to make homemade. Today you can buy sprouted pumpkin seeds, but the bottom line is they're going to be a little on the expensive side. And I show you how to do it, and it's so easy, and you never have to worry about these things being complicated, because I'm not going to show you how to do things that are complicated or that are going to take a long time on your part. We're going to make our appliances do the bulk of the work for us, or the actual grain or the seed, whatever the case may be. And that's why I say, if you look at the banner on my YouTube channel, on my homepage, I say traditional cooking for the modern pioneer. We want to make things like our moms or our grandmothers or our great-grandmothers made, but we're blessed to live in the 21st century, so we have appliances that can help us with that time element, so we don't have to put in the same time that pioneers did. We can take a lot of shortcuts and still in the end have these traditional foods to eat that are better for us than what we can buy at the store, and will make us and our friends and our family healthier. So that's basically what a traditional foods kitchen is. It's what it is to you. What do you want to make homemade? What type of traditional foods kitchen do you want? What type of traditional foods kitchen do you have a budget for? What type of traditional foods kitchen do you have the time for? All of this plays a role in what having a traditional foods kitchen means to you. But the bottom line is, I'm so glad that you're here on this journey with us, making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen. Even if you're just starting and you're just roasting that chicken, that makes all the difference in the world, because you decided to start. So if you'd like to learn more about a traditional foods kitchen, what traditional foods are, how to make these traditional foods, and just how to stock your pantry in general with foods you've made homemade, be sure to click on this video over here, where I share all of these things with you and more. And I'll see you over there in my traditional foods kitchen, my Texas Hill Country kitchen that is a traditional foods kitchen. Love and God bless.